Hi guys, welcome. This tutorial is about downward facing dog, possibly the most famous of the yoga postures. Downward facing dog makes an appearance in just about every yoga class, with the exception of yin classes or restorative classes where you generally don't experience downward facing dog. But in just about every other style and in most classes, you will experience downward facing dog, and you will practice it quite a bit. Because of its frequency of practice, it is important to practice it safely. So for this tutorial, you might want a couple blocks. I will show you a variation with blocks that can be nice on the wrists, but if you don't have blocks available, that's totally okay. Other than that, you might want a yoga mat. So go ahead and unroll your mat and we'll get started. So there are a number of ways that you can come into downward facing dog. The simplest is probably coming in from hands and knees, your tabletop position. So we'll start there, and then I'll show you a couple other ways that you can come into your downward facing dog. So starting in tabletop, hands and knees. In this position, you want to have the wrists right below the shoulders and the knees right below the hips. For downward facing dog, you want a bit of a wider stance. So I like to walk the hands forward about one hand's length, keeping them at shoulder width distance, and turning the index fingers to point forward so that the index fingers are parallel to each other. So what that means is that the hands will be facing outward very slightly. So if you look at your index fingers and make them parallel, you'll see that the hands fan outward just a little bit, not a lot, very slight. You could also hear downward facing dog cued with the middle fingers parallel. That is another way to practice it. I find that bringing the index fingers parallel to each other gives a little bit more opening in the shoulders. So finding the hand placement that works for you. And so now that we've walked the hands forward slightly, the arms are at an angle. Go ahead and tuck the toes under, lifting the knees and the hips, coming into downward facing dog. So as you lift, the hips go up, and then you press the chest back towards the legs and begin to descend the heels towards the earth. The heels do not have to touch the ground, but they are energetically reaching towards the ground. So you're in this inverted V shape with the body. So we'll start to build the engagement sort of from the bottom up. You are bearing quite a bit of weight on the hands in this pose, and I do often get students ask me how they can alleviate some of the pain in the wrists. And if you are activating properly and you are aligned properly in your downward facing dog, you should not feel pain in the wrists. So a couple of things for that. You want to make sure that when you're pressing down into the hands, you're really pressing. So you're pressing through all 5 of the knuckles on each hand, pressing firmly, and particularly thinking about pressing down into the L shapes created by the index fingers and the thumbs. So what tends to happen is the weight tends to fall to the outside, and the pinky is much smaller than the thumb, so it's a lot more strain on the outside of the hand. So you really want to draw the attention to pressing down. So imagine pressing down this space right in between the index finger and the thumb. You really want to press down through there. So pressing down, actually I'll turn to face you this way so you can see how I'm engaging the arms. So from here, so if you come into your downward facing dog shape, go ahead and shift forward slightly as though you're coming into a plank pose. From here, point the elbows out towards the sides and then draw them back towards your body. And from here, so you should feel how this begins to open up space in the neck. From here, You begin to press the chest back towards the legs, trying to keep this engagement in the arms. So you're turning the creases of the elbows in and forward as you press the chest back. So that will start to turn on the shoulder blades and the lats. So what oftentimes happens, what I see a lot, is students are kind of here. So you see that the shoulders are way up by the ears. There's no space for the neck here. So if you feel that this is happening to you, come on forward slightly, point the elbows out, draw them back. You should feel space open up in the side of the neck. And then from there, press the chest back towards the hands as much as is possible. So that's the activation we're looking for in the arms. From here, so we've got the arms set up, pressing the chest back. Make sure that we're not creating a large arch in the low back here. So the belly does want to continue to pull up and in slightly. So bringing the navel towards the spine so that the core is still active in this pose. And the head does not dangle. You want a nice long back of the neck here. So you want the head right in between the arms. So the ears are going to be in line with the arms. You can bring the gaze towards the feet or onto your mat, wherever feels most comfortable. That's going to allow for a long neck on all sides. Awesome. So making our way to the legs. We want to be pulling the kneecaps up towards the hip points so that the quadriceps remain active in this pose. And if you have a block handy, it can be nice to practice downward facing dog with a block between the thighs. If you watched the Tadasana tutorial, you saw we did a bit between the thighs. If you watched the blocks and a strap tutorial, you saw quite a bit of between the thighs work with the block. And this is another great place for that. So coming into your downward facing dog shape with the block between the thighs, you want to gently press in towards the block, creating an internal rotation in the thighs, and you'll start to feel that the heels sort of press out slightly. That is the activation that you want to feel in the legs. So it's a very active pose, even though it is used as a resting pose in many classes. You can go ahead and come down, remove your block. Now, if you do still feel sensitivity in the wrists, you have a few options. You have a couple options for alleviating that. One way to help that is to bring blocks underneath your hands. I only have the one block, but I can still show you. So you'll, nice and easy, just bring the blocks underneath your hands and then come into your downward facing dog with the blocks underneath your hands. So what this does is it lessens some of the angle in the wrist, making it a little bit easier on the wrist. And you can bring the hands to the edge of the block to make it easier to hold yourself up. Nice and easy. If that doesn't do enough for your wrists, you can always take dolphin pose, which is downward facing dog but on the forearms. So you will bring the forearms onto the earth at a shoulder width distance, and ideally you want to keep the wrists in line with the elbows, which are in line with the shoulder, so everything in one line. And then same as downward facing dog, you'll lift the hips up and back. All of the other engagement is the same, so you're pressing the chest back towards the legs, kneecaps up towards the hip points, the belly pulls up and in, the thighs active, the inner thighs. So that's an option for your downward facing dog if it's too much on the wrists or if you're practicing with a wrist injury. So the last thing I'll go over is just a couple other ways that we can come into downward facing dog. So one One way that you'll see often is coming in from standing. And that's nice and easy from a standing forward fold. From here, you'll bring palms onto the earth and then stepping the feet back into your downward facing dog position. You can also come into downward facing dog from your plank pose. And plank pose is a nice one to come into downward facing dog from because it should help align the feet and the hands. So if you're in your plank pose and you are aligned with the shoulders right above the wrists, legs long, from here, your hands and feet should stay right in the same place as you lift hips up and back for downward facing dog. So you should be in position with hands and feet from plank into downward facing dog. Another common transition is coming into downward facing dog from a back bend, so from cobra or upward facing dog. And that looks like this. So from cobra pose, you're here opening the chest, and then you'll lower the chest back down, begin to tuck the toes under, come through bent knees into your downward facing dog. Now if you're coming from upward facing dog, you'll have to flip over the toes. So in upward facing dog, you have the tops of the feet flat, you have the thighs off the earth, open chest. And then what you'll do is pull the belly up and in to lift, and then flip over the toes as you continue to press the hips up and back for downward facing dog. And the feet are hip width distance in downward facing dog. So in a forward fold, I often cue, if you place two fists in between your feet, that will measure your hip width distance. So if you think about this distance in between the feet, that's what you want in your downward facing dog as well. Hip width distance. So that is your downward facing dog. If you have any questions about this pose, please go ahead and drop them in the comments below. I hope this has been useful, and you can use these tips in your downward facing dog as you practice at home or at a studio. Have yourself an awesome rest of your day. Namaste.